Let's see, we're tweeting something out. Where we at?
All right. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Welcome everyone to Frank Analysis. I'm your host Franco. I'm joined here with Robbie Jaeger, fellow member of the MCSC network, to follow up on our discussion on the Colonial Pipeline spill, as well as John Kerry's family's ties to the American Petroleum Institute. Before we dive into that, though, what's up, Robbie? How are you doing?
What's up, man? It's good to be back. I know it's been a busy week for lots of people at the network. With
Mm-hmm.
the Clover's for Assange stuff and the protests in DC. I know you were down there, right? You went down there, didn't you?
Yeah, I live here, so it's great to
Oh,
have
okay,
them come here. And
nice.
I'm always like, if there's going to be a protest in DC, there's no excuse for me to not go.
Yeah, I feel
Right?
you. Yeah, I'm. Look, I wish I did really want to be there, but uh, financial and family issues kind of always usually keep me right here in North Carolina. So, but it was really good to see you guys all get together, uh, for a good cause. So, good job with that. Honestly, I was rooting for you guys.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, we know who's there in spirit. We know who's there,
Right.
supporting us, and we felt you. We felt Jesse Zerwell. We felt all these people who were supporting us from afar being there in spirit. But yeah, man, thanks a lot for supporting us while we
No
were there
problem,
on the
man.
ground. So yeah, you recently wrote an article that was released on Rockfin about climate envoy John Kerry and his son-in-law, right? His son-in-law
Mhm.
who got paid over $1 million by American Petroleum Institute, and that's been going on since 2007. So you
Mhm.
can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Sure. So here's the thing. I've been covering a little bit of some John Kerry stuff lately. Just because I think that it's important that he didn't. I mean, he kind of got announced to that position, and if most of the people on the progressive left, I guess that you would say, well, as far as politicians go, like we saw AOC was very pleased to be working on the climate committee with John Kerry. This was during the transition, right? Whenever we were doing the Bernie Biden like coalition task forces or whatnot, and then they had Sunrise Movement come in on the climate committee, and everybody was just praising John Kerry
Mm-hmm.
for his lifetime of commitment to environmental issues and whatever. So I looked in, and this story that I just reported is just another like a line of questionable ethics that circle around John Kerry, especially whenever it comes to the climate issue of our day. So John Kerry is married to a woman named Teresa Hines, and that name sounds familiar because it's on every ketchup bottle, mustard bottle. It's the Heinz food family, right? And she is the heiress to that fortune. And her son, Christopher, who I believe was in his 20s when his mother married John Kerry, um, but still are, pretty close. Uh, so her son Christopher, who's also will one day inherit the Heinz family fortune, he spent most of his time as a DC insider, as you do when you've got those kind of connections and money. So he spent years as a lobbyist. He spent years as just a consultant. He's been linked to a lot of Hunter Biden stuff for a lot of people that were following those stories closely. Uh, he has been lobbying for the American Petroleum Institute, which think of it as the largest trade association for the oil and gas industry. And they're not technically like a union. I don't want to give that impression, but they basically do all the things that a union does. They're like the NRA for the oil industry. It's the hard way to like kind of people ask me what they do. Well, they kind of do everything. They run PR. They lobby for companies. they they work with the federal government to actually make the laws and regulations that govern the oil, gas, and pipeline industries. Uh, they have 600 plus member companies, from the largest oil and gas companies of, across the globe, not just in America. So they're a hugely influential and powerful group. Um, so, like I said, Christopher Hines, John Kerry's stepson, has been on the lobbying payroll for them since 2007, and in that time has made over right around $1.2 million from the API, and it's a job he still holds to this day. There has not been any termination paperwork filed, with the U.S. Senate. So until that happens, he's still on the API payroll.
Complete conflict of interest, right? Because how are we going to have somebody who's a climate envoy and then his family is receiving money from these lobbyists that support all the poison that's destroying our environment and ruining our climate?
Yep.
And then we see like these people like 350.org and Sunrise Movement who are celebrating John Kerry before he got elected. When Joe Biden was talking about how he wanted John Kerry to be the climate envoy, they were celebrating him. Like Bill McKibben and Varshani Prakash from Sunrise.
Yep.
They were saying, "Oh, he will do an excellent job." So what's the deal with that, Robbie? Since you've done reporting on 350.org and Sunrise, why is it that these people are celebrating John Kerry?
Well, I think that's a long answer to a short question. So the short answer for that, I'm not as well versed in my 350 history as I am with Sunrise, but I can tell you one thing right now is that Sunrise's main priority is fundraising and being popular. I don't really think they're much in the way of really protesting much of anything these days. They're gonna hop on whatever hot button issue is popular. And also, while that may not seem like it has a lot to do with John Kerry in particular, the other part of that is, they're about fundraising. So they're about whoever's going to give them the most money. And whenever they tell you that they're grassroots funded, I've never met many grassroots billionaires in my life. Well, we know for sure that they took, at least $750,000 in dark money to fund their super PAC over the last 2 years. And they've taken at least $500,000 from the Open Society Foundation over the last 2 years as well. So they get institutional money that comes by way of, I forgot the 1630 fund. $500,000 went their way from them last year, and people might not know, but the 1630 fund was the largest dark money spender of the 2020 election cycle, spent over $60 million trying to get Joe Biden elected. Sunrise Movement dedicated staff time, made in-kind contributions to the Biden campaign for staff. They loaned out their staff to help Biden campaign. So of course they're going to uphold this pick, right? Whenever it came down to Bill McKibben, on the other hand, I mean, he's 350 is jumped the shark, I feel like. And I've got my own kind of like problems with Bill, so maybe I'm the wrong person to ask. I just feel like so often these issues are just kind of whatever is popular now. That's what we're talking about now. Even if, there might be a real problem over here, but until it's popular to talk about, then we're not going to talk about it. And I feel like so many politicians, media outlets, activism groups, and such are like that. But to get back to what you originally said about like a conflict of interest, that's why this is a story, right? So here's the thing. Christopher Hines has not actually, literally, he's been getting paid this whole time, but he hasn't actually lobbied a bill. Specifically lobbied a specific bill for API since 2012. So I've reached out to the American Petroleum Institute to find out more detail about what it is actually Hines is getting paid for, if not lobbying. I haven't heard anything in response as of yet. But what we also do know is that Hines actually does have a history of lobbying bills that his father or his stepfather's name is attached to. Um, and evidence of this was back when John Kerry introduced back a climate bill back in 2010. And then during the 2020, I mean, it kind of floundered around in Congress and in committee for a while. But his stepson, Christopher Hines, lobbied it uh, for the API. So
Mm-hmm.
we know that there's a history of Hines being completely okay with, you know, lobbying legislation that his stepfather's name is attached to. Now we flash forward all these years later. How does that matter now? If even though Hines is being paid, he's not technically lobbying any legislation. John Kerry isn't a senator anymore. So what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but is a very prevalent problem in DC, which is called shadow lobbying. And that is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically lobbying activity carried out by either lobbyists or non-lobbyists, non-registered lobbyists, that never gets reported. There are several regulations that state lobbying activity only consists of X, Y, and Z if X, Y, and Z lasted a certain amount of time. Like if you had a conversation about a certain bill for longer than I think it's like maybe 10 or 20 minutes, maybe or something like that. I could be, and those numbers might not be, but that's the structure of the rule. There's a time, there's an amount of time that you have to speak with a politician about a certain issue. If it goes beyond that, it needs to be reported as a lobbying activity. Mm-hmm. Sounds like a really weak regulation. It also seems nearly impossible to enforce because it's all rely upon the honor system. You're relying upon the lobbyists to report what they did, and that, oh yeah, we did it all by the book, 100%. It's all good. Which, you know, there's a bunch of conniving liars that work in DC, so I don't think an honor system is the best way to do anything in that town. So just imagine those family dinners, right? I mean, John
Yeah.
Kerry sitting at one side next to, you know, his wife Teresa, and then we got Christopher over there. Maybe he's got his wife or his significant other with them, and hey, maybe John and Chris want to go into the lounge and smoke a cigar, or, you know, just, you know, have a couple of drinks and talk about work. You think John Kerry's gonna be like, no, son, we can't talk about work? No, probably not. I mean, I'm not going to say no definitively, but probably not. And, you know, there is times, I mean, think about all the connections that not only that you have for being John Kerry's freaking stepson, let alone being the heir to the Heinz food family fortune. Just imagine all the connections that you have already. Yeah. The conversations that you're having with people that will never meet behind closed doors, you know, the amount of information and connections and the pull you have. And then imagine, you know, not talking about that with one of the most powerful, well, I wouldn't say powerful because I'm not exactly sure if John Kerry has any actual power other than just having a fancy title because his buddy, Joe Biden, wanted to give him a job. In which, honestly, I feel like is exactly what that's all about. But be that as it may, like, you've got all these connections, and like I said, John Kerry is a very close confidant to Joe Biden. They have been friends for years, and, you know, I feel like they bonded a lot. I mean, they obviously were in the Senate together for forever, and then of course John Kerry was Secretary of State when Joe Biden was Vice President. They used to fly around on Air Force Two, Hunter Biden and Christopher Hines tagging along for the ride. You know, they're very close, and to sit here and think that it's beyond the realm of possibility for John Kerry and his stepson, not just some random lobbyist dude that he knew that used to work for him a few years ago, his freaking stepson, right? To think that it's beyond the realm of possibilities for those two people to have a conversation about, you know, energy laws and transportation legislations and regulations and all that other stuff, in the context of John Kerry being the spokesperson for Joe Biden's climate agenda, knowing that it's just as possible that John Kerry could have that conversation and go back to Joe Biden or some other influential people in the White House and basically use John Kerry's connections to basically say, hey, this is what I think we should do. I've been, I've got sources. I mean, he could put it any way he wants. Like I said, it doesn't. The thing about this type of reporting isn't necessarily because something is going to happen. It's the fact that there is the opportunity for something to happen here, and quite honestly, it shouldn't be. Like these are the loopholes that we need to close. Um, Quite honestly, I don't know of any environmental, environmentally minded progressive or just anyone in general that would be okay with this, having your climate czar, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
have his stepson being a like a 13-14 year lobbyist for the biggest oil and gas trade association in the country. It's just not a good look, and it definitely deserves scrutiny.
Yeah, so whatever man in the chat says Kerry should be disqualified from office. This is not. It should be in a better world, but this is par for the course. This sounds very similar to Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden and his ties to Burisma. It's just nepotism is what you see with these politicians. They're gonna do the bidding for these elites. Nancy Pelosi and her children, and then isn't it funny, Robbie, how their children are like close to each other, like like close friends with each other. And
Yeah.
Christopher Hines, John Kerry's stepson, again, he was close to Hunter Biden, right?
Yes, he was very close to Hunter. But you want to know how close they were? They went into business together. And a lot of people that followed the Burisma story also have heard of the name Rosemont Seneca Partners. And that is the consultancy firm. I think it was, I might be, was a consultancy firm or like a hedge fund. I think it was a consultant. It was the consultancy firm started by Hunter Biden uh, and Christopher Hines. Right. Along with um, one other whose name is escaping me at the moment. There was another guy that was involved. Name was David Leiter, but there was one other person who's escaping me. But yeah, they were definitely very close. Now, if you believe the stories, they'll tell you that Hines left Rosemont Seneca because of Hunter Biden's dealings with Burisma, and he didn't want to get caught up in any of that, and he didn't want, he just didn't. He said it looked bad, or whatever the case was. But yeah, that's why supposedly he left Rosemont Seneca and cut ties with Hunter Biden, was over the Burisma stuff, because he just didn't want any of that stink on him, I guess, going forward. But yeah, definitely, man. And yeah, it's a big club. I mean, you got these guys are DC lifers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these guys are in politics they're born into politics. Um, and yeah, I mean, maybe not necessarily Hines, but he was born into money. He's never had to worry about that. And those types of individuals fit right in DC. Absolutely. So yeah, and of course, like, if you're in your mid 20s, like, what dude in his mid 20s walking around DC knowing that your father is, like, at that point, one of the most high profile senators that would go on to become a presidential candidate, that would go on to become Secretary of State. Um, yeah, of course you're gonna use those connections. I mean, that's the DC way. Um, but see, the problem was is that Kerry should have never been, and they're right. I didn't see the name and who said it in the chat, but they're right.
Mm-hmm.
He should have been disqualified, at least for this job. Because here's the myth about John Kerry, is that he said a lot of cool things over his life about the environment, but he's never really put his money where his mouth is, especially since he's been with Teresa Hines. Um, and we know that because we at MCSD just reported just like last week, that John Kerry finally, after years of investing in them, uh, him and his wife divested from over 400 different companies, and at least 6, 7, or 8 of them. I know that doesn't sound like a huge percentage, but come on. And I mean, look, there's been at least 7 or 8, maybe more, that I didn't look through. Just I'm talking about like big names popping off the page. Several of those companies were oil companies, pipeline companies, and gas companies. And, you could and that's just fuel. If you want to take the climate change debate even further, as far as contributors, you can bring in airlines, you could bring in, any kind of military contractor, defense company like Raytheon, Boeing, especially. they are like, what is the U.S. military is like the largest contributor to climate change in the entire planet. So there's that. Uh, but yeah, so there's evidence that says that John Kerry has been investing in at least one pipeline company, Kinder Morgan, since at latest 2016. Um, During his last stint or his last year in office as Secretary of State, he was he had to file he has to file reports for his finances just like everybody else. And after he left, obviously he doesn't have to, so we lose track of it after 2016. But there's no reason to believe that after he left office, that he just suddenly just stopped investing in these oil companies. So yeah, I would say that if you ever had like if you've been investing in oil companies for the last 20, 30 years, no, you probably shouldn't be the climate envoy for anyone,
Yeah.
because you're just talking a good game. I mean, quite honestly, if you're not going to pull your money out and put your money where your mouth is, then what good are you? So yeah, I agree with that. He should have never been in a position. But again, this is just a case of him getting that job because his buddy wanted him to have a job.
And
I
it,
mean,
it's
that's it.
and this should be just as ironic as Trump putting like the head of ExxonMobil in like a climate position also. But yeah, with John Kerry, like he's been involved in politics ever since he left the military. He's never
Mm-hmm.
called out the military industrial complex ever, which is the number one contributor to climate change. But take a look at this, Robbie. Here's an article from Mint Press News. It was published in December by Alan McLeod. It says John Kerry's think tank calls for war with Russia over climate change. So his solutions are taking more military action. And here are here's his 3-step the three things that he will prioritize on. He's not going to prioritize on reparations or which because black people in the global south are going to be affected by climate change the most.
Right.
He's not going to solve this problem by cutting back on fossil fuels. Instead, here's what he'll do. Number one, he's going to have a huge rebuilding of the United States military bases. So he wants to expand military bases across the world. Number two, countering China in the Pacific. So wherever China's making deals with other countries to try to improve their energy system, the U.S. is going to try to counteract that with their
Mm-hmm.
military.
Just like they did with Russia.
Yeah, and then speaking of Russia, number three, preparing for a war with Russia in the newly melted Arctic. So, what does this sound like to you, Robbie? What do you think about that?
I mean, that sounds exactly like what something I would expect something to come out of John Kerry's mouth. Um, Here's the thing about John Kerry is that this is all no these viewpoints of his are not breaking news. At least they shouldn't be. Only reason that so many people don't really remember is that during his campaign when he ran for president, and I want to say it was 2004 when he ran against George W. Bush, uh, the man was the most boring, uncharismatic speaker, almost maybe in the history of American politics. And he was telling everybody all of this stuff back then, but nobody could fucking listen to it because you just couldn't. I couldn't sit through more than 5 minutes of John Kerry speaking because he's only gotten out two sentences by then. Um, and that's the thing about Kerry is, I mean, he grew up, or he didn't grow up, but he came up, he cut his political chops with the same people that Joe Biden did,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're just that Cold War era, China, Russia, bad, bad, bad. No matter what, you always have to keep that fear of war. That's always important, especially if you're a politician or anybody in any kind of position of power. You always have to dangle that threat of war above your constituents' head, because that keeps the fear in them. And if they're afraid, if you can keep them afraid, they'll keep looking to you to protect them. And you keep telling them, yeah, I'll protect you. This is what we have to do in order to be protected. And if you're afraid, you're saying, hey, man, do what you got to do. We trust you. Protect us. Save us. Uh, it's a messiah complex, but that's the way DC works. That's the way power stays in power, with fear. And so yeah, that kind of stuff doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, he's a neoliberal. He always has been. He has no business. I mean, he fits right in a Biden administration, but he does not at all resemble a climate warrior or anybody that needs to be in any kind of position to affect environmental legislation. Because what he's going to do is what he's already going to do. He's gone around the country. He's gone around Europe. He said a lot of nice, fancy stuff about the Paris Climate Accords, um, but he's not actually. He needs to be coming around America, talking to people like Colonial Pipeline about what they need to do, right? But nope, we're too busy putting sanctions on companies that are helping Russia build their pipeline
Mm-hmm.
uh, to help better their country. Because why? Why? Because America can't make money off of that gas, and America doesn't want Russia to have any money. They don't, America doesn't want anybody to have shit. That's just basically how we roll. And you know what? You guys want to build a giant pipeline that would change it would change the financial structure of the way that energy is produced and sold in Eastern Europe. Um, but it also does it is advantageous to Russia. Uh, so the United States isn't going to let that happen, and they're going to punish anybody that helps build it. But on the contrary, back home, we actually have pipelines that are spouting leaks like nobody's business, and nobody at the federal level seems to care, even though we keep telling them over and over again that we have a pipeline problem. It's not about pipelines that are trying to be built now, it's about the ones we already have. um,
Mm-hmm.
and we need help over here. Like, leave the Russians alone and come help us out, because we're the ones that put you in power.
Yeah, and like they're instigating and trying to escalate something into a hot war by going after these two powerhouses, China and Russia. Um, like it makes absolutely no sense. Like, we want to protect the environment. Like, this is our climate envoy guy, and then he wants to destroy the planet while he's trying to save it. It makes absolutely no sense. But if you dig deep and if you keep up with the research that Robbie puts out, then you understand that he doesn't care. He does the bidding of these powerful people that don't care about destroying the planet. So Robbie, can you tell us a little bit more about the American Petroleum Institute?
I mean, yeah, I mean, basically, like I said before, they are the largest trade association in the country for the oil and gas industry. They have a 600 companies are members of them, and I mean that's from Colonial Pipeline, Shell, BP, Marathon, Murphy's, and even a lot of the list goes on. It's probably the largest trade association of its kind, maybe of its kind in the entire country, not just of the oil and gas industry. Um, they've been around for a really long time, uh, and you know, look, they're extremely influential. They I like when I compared them to the NRA for oil companies, right? Just because they function kind of in the same way. NRA, as we know, right, their job is to promote, gun purchases, basically just to promote the gun industry in general, right? Um, so that's what they do. They get on Twitter, they get on social media, Facebook, whatever, and they do that. And they also, if you were writing an article about anything gun related and you wanted to get uh, a point of view from someone that was maybe on a different side of the fence of you, or somebody that was pro gun, you could call the NRA for a statement. You could call, they would talk to you. So they're basically propagandists, right? If I mean, even though it's not technically state sanctioned media, I mean they're basically propagandists for their respective industries, and the API is no different. Um, the American Petroleum Institute is basically meant to propagandize anybody that will listen, to tell you that not only is the oil and gas industry necessary, but it's also safe and getting safer, and basically tell anybody that will listen that we're the good guys. Um, if I were to ask the American Petroleum Institute about Colonial Pipeline and the 1.2 million gallon spill, their response would likely go something along the lines of them bragging about how they gave Colonial Pipeline their safety awards for no number of years, and that Colonial Pipeline probably sets industry standards as far as what their inspection methods are and stuff like that. They would just fluff them up. They'd puff them up, right? That's what the API does. That's their entire function. Well, not their entire function, because the biggest problem is, and this is what a lot of my reporting on Colonial Pipeline has been kind of morphed into now, is that it's not just the pipeline companies that are the problem, it's the regulators. And a big reason why is because the American Petroleum Institute, like I said, massively powerful, massively influential, just overall massive. They've got their hands in everything. And the way the federal government goes, a lot of issues, and especially when it comes to regulatory oversight of a number of industries, not just the oil and gas, and we might have talked about this before, but they prefer, when possible, for federal regulators to use industry standards, right, to form those regulations, as opposed to a bunch of people just sitting down and coming up with your own rules. They would rather you use the rules of the governing authority, right, of that industry. So there's a couple ways to look at this. There's and I've used this analogy before, when you're talking about like like the profession of welding, right? Sure, it's probably an okay idea to have a bunch of expert welders sit down and determine, or welding companies or heads, whatever whatever, sit down and determine the safest, the best way, the best practices for how to govern that profession, set the regulations for that profession. But it's a different animal altogether when you're allowing the oil and gas industry to sit down at a table and write their own rules. They're not just writing their own rules, they're writing the law or helping write the law. Now, this isn't necessarily breaking news. This has been going on for a very long time, but it's also indicative of why we have the amount of issues that we have, because they get to write their own rules. And the API is most definitely the most hands-on about that. And to me, like I said, in certain industries, fast food workers, you want to set your own rules. I think that's fair. Oil and gas companies, I don't think they've really earned the right or the trust to be able to do that. So yeah, that's why I have a huge problem with that. And Colonial Pipeline has got seats on major committees on the API, and they've also got a seat. Here we go again, getting to this other conversation now. They've also got a seat on the Rules Advisory Commission for for PIMSA, which is the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. They have a Rules Advisory Committee that's made out of like first responders, like fire chiefs, stuff like that. And then there's 5 federally appointed people on the board, and then there's 5 representatives from major oil gas pipeline companies. And one of those 5, of course, is Colonial Pipeline, because they're the largest pipeline in the country that nobody's ever heard about. And they are the largest pipeline. They are. And so the problem is that they're not only just setting this industry standards, API is, and then shipping them to the regulators for approval. They're on they are the regulators almost at this point. They have seats at the regulation table, which is a problem, which is a huge problem for me. And it should be a huge problem for everyone else. And we're starting to see the results of this, specifically with Colonial Pipeline, if you've been keeping up with the reporting.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, Colonial Pipeline extends from like Texas, and it goes all the way up to like New Jersey, the New York Bay Area. And if you're hearing about this for the first time, I've interviewed Robbie before about the Colonial Pipeline. He has articles on Rockfin for you guys to check out. But yeah, let's continue that conversation about Colonial Pipeline. I have some of the reporting that you've been publishing on Twitter here for you to elaborate on. Sure. So you posted this on March 15th. You said a report filed with PHMSA shows Colonial Pipeline spraying yet another leak through a broken gasket in Pasadena, Texas, spilling approximately 670 gallons of kerosene and causing nearly $50,000 in property damage. And then you added Colonial Pipeline. Says the damage was caused by the recent winter storm. And so they're trying to run away from any responsibility from that. And then you said for those keeping score, Colonial Pipeline has already dumped 760 gallons of fuel and caused $630,000 in property damage over 4 separate incidents since the start of 2021. This obviously doesn't include the 1.2 million gallon spill in North Carolina last year, which they're still under investigation for. So pretty much they're trying to not take responsibility for this, right? They're trying to blame natural disasters. But yeah, go ahead, Robbie.
Yeah. I mean, look, yeah, I mean, Colonial Pipeline is going to do whatever they can to make it seem like, hey, man, this was a freak accident. Definitely not at all a trend. Even though if you look at the logs on the PHMSA website, I'm really getting really good at saying that. I usually mess up on the
PHMSA.
letters. But if you look, there's the logs of all of their incident reports. It's a mile long. I mean, and it goes on forever. And when in comparison to like almost every other pipeline out there that I've looked into, it's a night and day issue here. A DAPL for all the attention it gets had one incident since 2018, and that was last year. Now every incident from every pipeline is important. All right. And I'm not trying to sit here and say that it's not. DAPL is a blight on our country. I don't think it should be there. I think it's a damn shame that it was ever allowed to happen in the first place. But we've got a pipeline currently right now that's destroying our country, little by little, piece by piece, drop by drop. And it's happening all the time. Every few weeks, we're getting another report from Colonial Pipeline about how there's been another incident. And what's messed up, and this is, again, back at the regulator side, a lot of these reports that I've been reporting on, like that one and the one before it, that was only a 70-gallon spill, but it caused $500,000 in property damage. These reports, those incidents weren't even required to be reported because of federal regulations. That was just out of the kindness of Colonial's own heart that they decided, with pure transparency, is why they decided to report these things, even when they didn't have to. Which, like I said, it demands attention. So what's going on with Colonial now, right? For those that didn't catch my first interview or haven't read up, real briefly, August 2020, there was a pipeline spill right outside of Charlotte. It was first reported as 63,000 gallons, which is a big number, but it got swept under the rug by the media. Nobody really talked about it, including myself, right? I'm not gonna sit here and say that I just knew something everybody else didn't. That's not true. January 2020 or January 2021 comes around, finds out that state regulators had said, hey, okay, guys, you guys aren't giving us the right. There's no way that these numbers that you predicted are accurate. Give us a new estimate. And so Colonial Pipeline came back with a new estimate that was 1.2 million gallons, which is like 2,000% higher than their first, than their initial estimates. They said that the leak could have been going on for days, weeks, or even months before it was discovered. And Colonial didn't even discover it, which means that it could have gone on for even longer if it wasn't for two teenagers riding their bikes through that nature preserve and smelled the fumes and got in contact with somebody to go out there and look at it. And the reason why that is because Colonial Pipelines and pipelines in general, their inspection equipment generally cannot detect a leak. Let's see if I'm getting this right. Generally cannot detect a leak that is less than 3% of the product being moved through the pipeline. Okay, I'm hoping that makes sense. So if you've got 100 gallons, just for easy numbers' sake, you got 100 gallons moving through this pipeline, it can be leaking like 2.9 gallons a second, right? Given these numbers, or what a minute, a second, whatever, and not be detected, right? Because it's just the amount is so small going. So that's, now I want you to now take that number and expand it by millions upon millions, by tens of millions, and then you'll start to see like these leaks are obviously like hundreds of gallons per second or whatever, whatever the volume may be, and the equipment still can't detect them, which to me is just, it's inadequate. If you can't detect that, then your technology is inadequate, and you'd find better technology. But that's neither here nor there. So they're under investigation by state authorities for the 1.2 million gallon leak. They're under investigation. We have discovered at MCSC. I talked to somebody at PIMSA. They couldn't give me any details about what's going on in the discussions that they're having, but they did assure me that the investigation is still underway. So that is a developing story. My reporting, that where I come into play, is once I found out about the 1.2 million gallon spill, I started looking at their inspection records, and their newest ones, the most updated ones, are the ones from 2019. The ones from 2020 should be available sometime in June. But the 2019 inspection records basically showed that on a top end, they inspected at most 45% of their pipeline during that year. And they only checked, like, pulling it from memory, 650 miles in that year for cracks, which coincidentally is what the leak came from in 2020, was a crack. So if you can go back to 2018, if you think 650 miles out of what 5,600 is not a lot, you would be correct, but it's more than the 150 miles that Colonial Pipeline checked for cracks in 2018. So that's what we're dealing with, right? But those fall within regulations. That's a huge issue here, is that those piss poor, bare bones, bare minimum inspection standards fall within federal regulations. That's why they're able to do this over and over again with zero accountability. So, well, in that same report that I wrote that was detailing those inspection reports, I had also stumbled across another inspection report that this time PIMSA had done. And it wasn't on pipeline integrity. It was on a lot of like procedural stuff at certain control operator points up and down the East Coast that Colonial Pipeline operates. And, two major findings that PIMSA found that we reported on was, first and foremost, they had let at least 5 different stretches of pipe that ran underneath of navigable waterways. They had let those go sometimes like anywhere between 5, 6, sometimes 10, 11 months past their mandated 5-year inspection periods. And the other big finding was that PIMSA also told Colonial Pipeline that they weren't adequately keeping their corrosion inspection records. So those were the two. There was like 6 allegations that inspection that PIMSA did turned up that we reported on, initially. And I just found out yesterday that Colonial Pipeline actually responded to those allegations, or some of those allegations. And like you said earlier, like you started off this little segment with, is like, it seems like they're going out of their way to not take the blame for anything. And that's exactly the sentiment that they echoed in this letter to PIMSA, where they say, look, they said, without admitting or denying fault in the matter, we're not contesting that these things happened, or at least 3 out of the 4 initial. So here's the thing, and I know the reporting can be kind of confusing, and these are just mundane little points, but the initial report had 4 violations in it, one of which was the one about the navigable waterways going past their inspection dates. The next day, PIMSA amended that report and added 2 more, and one of those was the corrosion inspection records issue. So when Colonial responded, they only responded to the initial first 4. So they did not, in that letter to PIMSA, respond to the allegation that they were not adequately keeping their records for inspections. And maybe they will sometime in the future, but as of right now, they haven't. But what they did say was like, hey, these things happen. We're not contesting it. We'd like to settle. They want to settle with PIMSA. And like I said, these have nothing to do with the leak. But the reason why this is significant is because Colonial knows it's in trouble. And Colonial also knows that, I mean, hey, they're admitting right now, we let these crossings go almost a year past their inspection date. And dude, in the report, they blame it on a contractor. they, oh, well, we hired this new
Jeez.
contractor and he hadn't started yet, and blah, 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 blah. It's just a bunch of excuses, right? Um, so yeah, I think that like they're admitting to you, for anybody that will listen, like, yeah, we let these things happen. Yeah, our pipeline, we're lax on this. And I mean, without admitting or denying fault, we're willing to say that these things happen. So I mean, it's legal double speak. It's a bunch of BS, but they've got a lot coming at them right now because the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality has hit them up with a new list of well, not new, because I've reported on this before, but after Colonial sent state regulators a 1,600-page report detailing the site of the incident and the incident itself, the state regulators here in North Carolina sent them back a violation page that had 22 separate violations on it, just stemming from the inadequacies of the report. And they basically told them, don't make things worse for yourselves if you don't give us this information that you left out of your initial report. So they're getting it from all sides right now, except from, politicians and activism groups. And honestly, PIMSA and PIMSA's not going to have any reason to act if nobody cares about it, which is why I've been trying to do my best or do my part to amplify this story, man, because Colonial Pipeline is aging. Well, I'm not going to say it's aging. It's old. It's decrepit. It's falling apart. It's springing leaks everywhere. There's already been 4 incidents since the beginning of 2021. There's been 32 pipeline spills in North Carolina, or they've caused 32 of the 38 pipeline spills in North Carolina since 2000. They've caused 271 or 272 out of the 2,750 pipeline spills in America in general in the last 20 years. They're accountable for 10% of every pipeline spill in the United States in the last 20 years. 1 out of every 10. Colonial Pipeline. That's huge. That's a huge issue. They've done like $58 million or $60 million in property damage since the beginning of 2017. No outcry at all. Not from journalists, not from activism groups, not from the politicians that are supposed to care about these things. Nothing. So yeah, it's a disheartening situation, and it's obviously an uphill battle when you're fighting against the biggest oil pipeline or the biggest natural gas pipeline in the country. And that means you're going up against Royal Dutch Shell. That means you're going up against Koch Industries. But it's unacceptable. And for everybody out there that cares about Dakota Access, I would just plead with you to see this point. While yes, Dakota Access is a very important story, and it does deserve its activism and its protests, but if we don't shut down, or not shut down, because that's a different ball game, but if we don't clamp down on regulations right now and show specifically on Colonial Pipeline, and if we don't show Colonial Pipeline that you guys are, the way you operate is unacceptable, you're going to stop poisoning the environment, you're going to do better, or else we will shut you down. But we will see, that's the thing, man. It's like there's got to be something you can hold over these oil companies' heads to punish them. But when you've already got an active pipeline that's like the largest carrier of gas up and down the East Coast, they've kind of got it in the bag. But again, back to my point before I got off that little tangent, if you care about Dakota Access, look at Colonial Pipeline and realize how bad, rickety, old, and how it's falling apart and spilling shit everywhere. If we don't put the regulations in place now to fix Colonial Pipeline and to let Colonial Pipeline know that it's not going to be acceptable going forward, if we don't make an example out of Colonial Pipeline, then 20 years from now, Dakota Access Pipeline is going to look just like it. And it's going to be leaking and spilling oil and gas all over the West. And then we're going to have 2 Colonial Pipelines, springing leaks all over the damn place. So this is something that we can fix on a regulation level. This is something that a Democratic controlled Congress could do. This is something that a Pete Buttigieg could do, being as he's in charge of DOT, who was ones that are in charge of PIMSA. Um, these regulations can be amended. Like this is something. This is a lot easier. I think this would amending regulations and oversight of a pipeline industry in the United States would probably be a lot easier of a legislation to draw up than, or even get passed probably than a Medicare for all bill. Um, I'm not saying Medicare for all is not important. What I am saying is that the PIMSA overhaul, regulatory overhaul, is 100% possible. If but the politicians have to want to do it, and they're not going to want to do it unless the public is pressuring them to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, they probably won't. But that's the only chance you'll ever have to see if they actually might, is if we beat down their door about it. So I implore everybody that if you want to raise awareness for Dakota Access, and you see Sunrise Movement, you see AOC or Bernie Sanders or whoever it may be out there, railing against Dakota Access, that's great. But you need to bring to their attention that Colonial Pipeline on the East Coast is actively poisoning the environment on what seems like a weekly basis, and that it deserves their attention, and it deserves their activism. And if they care about this type of stuff, and we need their help, because we're not going to be able to get any movement. We're not going to be able to get any movement without it. That's the sad part about it.
It's truly unbelievable. I mean, that amount of environmental destruction should be making national headlines. Every politician should be talking about it. It's a national problem. And it's something to consider about all these other pipelines, like how you were saying. So I echo what you were saying. What you were imploring people to do is, if you're living around North Carolina or you're living near the pipeline, try to organize something. At least share Robbie's article to more people, or share this video, or share the video that he had with Misty and Jesse over on Facts on the Ground, because they're not talking about it in any other news outlet. The message needs to get out. So if you know what's going on, please share the information to as many people as you can, because the more we get informed, the more that then translates into on the ground organizing, and we really need some on the ground organizing about this. So I just want to quickly read some of these super rays before we move on. DJ L7 said, "One love, brother. Glad to listen to some environmental stuff." Snork Y2K said, "Not a job. These people get positions of power to leverage other grift, like not allowing a sale until their spouse gets a multi-million-dollar speaking spot. The pay from the position is nothing compared. Remember how Clinton's went from broke to having a $10 billion corporation very soon after Hillary became senator and proved she still had power." It's just par for the course. Like these power couples, like you and Jesse were talking about Ro Khanna and his wife. Up. Like he tries to hide behind his wife and is like, "Oh, yeah, I'm not going to say anything about her finances because it's sexist."
Yeah. No, yeah, and if your viewers don't know what I'm talking about, earlier in 2020, maybe it might have been late 2019. God, at this point, I can't really remember. But some time ago, I had reported.
It was in 2020.
No. Yeah, it was right around the time. It was right after the lockdown started.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had reported that Ro Khanna's and his wife's joint trust fund, whoever was running that account, loaded up on Pfizer and on DuPont, who makes PPE, right? Yeah, they loaded up on them right before the crash happened, or right after the crash. I mean, it wasn't right before. They loaded up on them like during the dip. This was a long time ago, but regardless of that's an obvious play. Like you're loading up on these companies because we're going to need vaccines and PPE for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
It's an easy play to make. Sure, fine. Like I could have probably guessed to make that play. If I was just a Robinhood investor, just chilling on my couch, I could probably figure that one out. But that's not the point. The point was, it was like, dude, you're an elected official having conversations behind closed doors with people that we'll never meet, talking about stuff we'll never know about. That's not, especially if you call yourself a progressive, man, that's just not the way you should be doing business. So when I reported it, he took exception to it. uh, as you would imagine they would. And he decided, but he hid behind his, well, that's my wife's accounts.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not, I couldn't tell her what to do with her money. That would be sexist. Sh- sure, right, whatever. But John Kerry just made you look stupid from your left on that issue, because whether or not he meant it or not is irrelevant. The fact is that John Kerry got him and his wife on the same page and divested, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is more than what Rokana can say, because he just keeps making excuses as to why. You know how much Raytheon and like General Dynamics and like shit he's got. Looking at that, look, some of those are blind trust, but John Kerry just proved, regardless of what you think about, oh well, Rokana's not the one making the purchases, he's not the one directing the finances of the accounts. That all might be 100% true, but here's the problem: all it takes is a phone call, and you're never going to convince me otherwise, because John Kerry just fucking proved it. He picked up the phone, he called his money guy, and he told them, somebody told them, we got to get out of these companies. And what did they do? They got out of the companies.
Mm-hmm.
It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that for Rokana. It was as simple as that for John Kerry. Just two different, just, look, Connor could have just come out and told me that he didn't want to. I would have taken that answer a lot better than the bullshit that he gave me about his wife. Like, straight up. But I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because I find it amusing, as much as I'm over here shitting on John Kerry, that, like, even he has the broken clock, axiom where he's right twice a day. I mean, but like, damn, like Rokana, how are you going to let Kerry outflank you from the left on your personal finance shit? Like, that's it's DC, man.
Yeah. And at least also he replied to you. Like there's all these politicians just like ignore you and they run away. They don't want to acknowledge things. But he did bullshit you. But man,
Yeah,
if he's willing to go on Jimmy Dore's show, I would love to have him on this show with you, like on a panel, and you just like hold him accountable to all these
Well, did
things.
anybody ever ask him about all the shit that he's got in his bank account?
I don't think
I
so.
don't think so
Yeah.
either. Yeah, I was just checking. I must have missed that if that happened. But then again, like, I mean, I'm not sitting here and saying that everything I report is national news. So it's possible that a lot of people that had Rokana on just hadn't heard about that. I mean, I get that. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I'm a nobody, right? And so I mean, I understand that, but I just don't see how, like, we really got to pay attention to these politicians, that, especially the ones like, people always wonder, why are you pushing so hard on AHC? Why are you digging in so hard against so-called progressives? Because everybody else, for one, in the media loves picking on the GOP, right? The GOP gets picked apart like Thanksgiving dinner
Mm-hmm.
every day. I feel like we're screaming into the void on that one, right? Or whispering,
Or
whispering
just
and
saying
shouting
water's
match.
wet.
Yeah, we're saying the thing that everybody knows: GOP is corrupt. Okay, is that really breaking news? Or it's not really breaking news for people that know better that DNC is corrupt too. I mean, yeah, of course. But when it comes to progressive politicians, the ones that told you that they were the progressive ones, that were gonna not just hold the GOP accountable, but hold their own party accountable as well. Um, that type of politician is the most dangerous,
Mm-hmm.
because they're the ones that tell you what you want to hear, tell you, hey, we know Mitch McConnell's an asshole, but you know what? Nancy Pelosi is a problem too. We're not going to play party politics. We're going to do people over party. I mean, how many times have you heard that? Um, and it never happens, because everybody just blindly follows them where they say they're going to take you, and they never do any kind of real critical analysis of anything that they say or any of their finances. And if you come out and you talk shit about them, then people will call you paid private intelligence, or they'll call you you're doing the establishment's bidding. Yeah, there might be valid criticisms you can make of this person, but just even discussing those criticisms helps the establishment. That's
Yeah.
bullshit.
Yeah.
Guys, that is bullshit. The way that you do this is that you take the ones that are supposed to be on your side and you hold them to that standard that they set for themselves. And if they fall short of that standard, you let them know. And if they don't remediate, then they don't care, because that's the only way it works. And look, this is my biggest problem with like just the way that we do politics in general right now is asinine. The reason why we don't have any powerful third or any major third parties is not, it's mainly because of the Democrats' fault and a lot of the activism groups that get sucked into the DNC machine. Let me propose a question to you, Franco. What do you think, given their popularity, given their obvious ability to fundraise and organize on a national scale, what do you think the benefits would have been had, say, a Sunrise Movement from the beginning organized and put all their immense resources and organizing capabilities behind the Green Party instead of putting it behind Democrats?
Yeah, we would have benefited so much, but then they're like they try to do the lesser evilism thing. It almost seems like controlled opposition.
That's like, exactly what it seems like. Yeah. Exactly what it seems like. And my point is that these grassroots, I'm going to make sure I get them air quotes on my camera so you guys know what these grassroots organizations that claim to want to affect change. They claim to want to save the environment, and they want to stop the wars, they want to do this, they want to do that, but they continuously turn around and not only tell you to vote for, but they fundraise for, and they do interviews for, and anything they can do, campaign for the same people that exacerbated those problems, the same people that made these problems what they are today. And I just don't see that. Like, if that's the definition of insanity, last time I checked, it was doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So eventually you have to wonder why people keep thinking that they can vote in Democrats over and over, or Republicans over and over, and thinking that something is going to eventually magically get better one day, when that's the reason why we're in this predicament. So whenever you get organizations like Sunrise, and like Indivisible and stuff like that, and they're telling you to vote Democrat, they're doing it wrong, guys. The way that it should be happening, it really can you just imagine the Sunrise Movement's guys? The Sunrise Movement's PAC made more money than the entire Green Party did in 2020 on a federal level. There was more donations to Sunrise Movement's PAC than the National Green Party. Can you imagine if they put that manpower behind the actual third party, you build that third party up from the ground and actually put that organization and all that money behind of a third party? I mean, get rid of the Sunrise out of your brain and just think of an organization with that size and that type of support.
Yeah, if it was the way Sunrise is supposed to be, right? And if they could have like these activists that are also politicians, like what a politician is supposed to be.
Yes.
But we're not getting that. And I never thought about it like that. Yeah, if they're supposed to be objective, why aren't they supporting the Green Party if they're the ones that are meeting them?
The Green Party. We can have a Green Party that could be competing on a national level within the next 4 to 8 years if Sunrise and all the other organizations like them, like Working Families, all of them, if they were to got behind of a third party, right, and put their resources behind them and try to build an alternative to the two parties that keep fucking you over and over and over again, we might actually have a viable third party this decade, if that's what they wanted to do. But instead, they keep shepherding you back to the DNC, which is why we never make any progress on any of these issues. It's a shame, really. It's a waste. It's a waste of resources, and I mean, quite honestly, it's a waste of time.
And that's why they need people like us calling them out on that bullshit. And we need people like you, like the audience members who are watching this, to spread the word. Spread the word about how Sunrise is bullshit and they're not using their resources like how they can. And the same thing with these parties that are out of touch with the activists, that are just there for national politics and only really do anything like try to do anything like every 4 years, and then they put people with no charisma who are out of touch and repeat State Department talking points like Howie Hawkins. Like there has to be a party that has a connection with the activists that are on the ground, and we don't have that. Not with the Libertarians, the Green Party, or with Movement for a People's Party. Robbie, before we close off, I want to share this final tweet that I have here that I would like for you to go into more depth here. You reported this today. So you said, new in a letter to the PHMSA Colonial Pipeline, without admitting or denying fault, is not contesting allegations they allowed 5 sections of pipe to go up to 11 months past their 5-year inspection. The inspection the violation stemmed from was reported by MCSC. So yeah, you posted screenshots of that letter, but go ahead and address that.
Well, yeah, I think we briefly covered that earlier. It's just the like I said, that and the inspection that PIMSA did was basically, it was like a year-long inspection. They inspected a lot of different facilities, not necessarily pipeline, like stretches of pipeline. I think more or less this inspection that PIMSA did on Colonial Pipeline had a lot to do with their facilities, a lot of procedural stuff, manuals, training, stuff like that. Excuse me. So this took like a year-long inspection for PIMSA to do. And then they came back with a few violations, right? And like I said, they came out with 2 reports. The first report was had 4 violations on it, one of which was the stretches of pipe going way beyond their inspection date, as I referenced in that tweet. That allegation, Colonial Pipeline is not contesting. They're not admitting or denying any fault, blah, 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 whatever. That's legal speak, so they don't get sued, whatever, I assume. But yeah, they're basically not contesting, hey, this happened. Yeah, sure. And they blamed it on a contractor. Like I said, they said that it was because they hired a new guy and the new guy didn't start on time and blah, 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 whatever it was. And then, like I said, the other allegation that PIMSA came back with, that we felt was a major allegation, was actually separated from the 4 that Colonial is responding to in this letter. There was 2 more allegations that were added into an amended report that PIMSA put out like a day after their initial assessment. And one of those violations had to do with what we were at MCSC reported about their inspection records being inadequately kept. So Colonial Pipeline did not respond to that allegation in the letter that PIMSA gave them, but they did respond to 3 out of the 4 allegations from the original letter that PIMSA sent, stemming from their inspection in 2019. They did not contest that they let these pipeline sections go almost a year without being inspected. So I mean, which means they sat there for almost 6 years without being inspected under a navigable waterway, which means that they could have busted a leak at any time and completely flooded these waterways, and they just let them sit there for 6 years in some cases. So that's completely unacceptable, in my opinion. Basically, the crux of this story is that Colonial Pipeline is getting hit from all angles right now. They're getting hit from federal authorities. They're getting hit from state authorities. They're getting hit by me. I know that I'm the person that's been beating down their door every day. So, they're trying to save face. They want to settle these little violations, right? In as quickly as possible. And so, yeah, I mean, look, what I'm doing currently right now with Colonial is twofold, right? I'm waiting, which is the hardest part. I'm waiting for PIMSA and the North Carolina Department of Economic or Environmental Quality, I say that every time, to finish their investigations and hand down whatever punishments they're going to hand down. I do expect at least the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality to hand down a decent sized fine. They seem to be way more invested in this case than PIMSA does. But I think if the DEQ puts a fine, and this is just me reading tea leaves here, but if the DEQ levies a fine against Colonial, I think it would encourage PIMSA to do the same. And PIMSA has a much bigger authority and to levy a much bigger fine on Colonial, which they definitely deserve. So that's the first part. We're just waiting on that development. But in the meantime, um, I'm covering every drop.
Mm-hmm.
I'm letting your viewers know. I'm letting Colonial Pipeline know. I'm covering every drop they spill on U.S. soil until somebody in power feels compelled to do something about it. So if that leak is 5 gallons or 5,000 gallons or 500,000 gallons or anywhere in between, I'm going to report it. Just because people need to see the constant drip, drip, drip,
Mm-hmm.
drip of fuel that is coming out of this pipeline. It's unlike anything else happening in the country as far as pipelines go right now, and it needs attention. And I feel like, hey, the only way to bring attention to it is just to be relentless and keep the drip, and keep reporting every drop, and eventually either somebody will care or or they won't, but I mean, I have to at least try. So that's what I'm doing now while we're waiting on bigger developments from the big spill. I'm going to take them to task for every little drop they spill. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and guys, I know a lot of this stuff may sound depressing, but we're not here just complaining. Like we're giving you information here so you can understand what's going on, and then we're going to encourage you to take some on the ground action.
Sure.
If you don't know anybody around where you live, we have online communities, and you can meet people that live near you. I've met a lot of
Also,
people who live near me, and I get so surprised. Like, there's potential there for you to organize with people that are about as informed as you. Like, you share information online with people, you get more informed, you meet people, and then that translates again to on the ground action.
yeah.
And I gotta say, it was lovely meeting a lot of you guys in DC. And then you get stuff like this. So you get like little fun pins, like MCSC
Uh,
network pins.
Swag. Where's mine? Oh,
Oh,
I
we
need to
gotta
get
get
mine.
yours. We got
Yeah.
Glory Jones and Steve Poikonen
Oh,
pins of
snap.
Slow News
Okay.
Day.
They're icons.
Combo Couch. We also got Clovers for Assange and WikiLeaks. But yeah, like it's a fun experience to
Good
be
shit.
on the ground trying to, hold these people accountable. I mean, we
Mhm.
protested outside of CNN on April 10th. The MCSC network, we're gonna have Action First Launch and Slow News Day, like, and Combo Caps. They're gonna be in LA protesting for Assange. We need that now more than ever. So we're encouraging you guys to take on the ground action. Robbie, are there any final words you want to leave the audience with before we close off?
Yeah, sure. Just real quick though. For one thing, thanks again for having me on, man. That's
Mm-hmm.
always great. We needed anytime you want to have me back, I'd gladly come on. I love coming on, talking to you. But second of all, for all anybody on the West Coast watching this, I know that Colonial Pipeline spill seems like an East Coast thing. It seems like a red state thing, right? And for a large part, it is. A lot of the incidents are occurring in Louisiana, in Alabama, in North Carolina. But these things affect you guys too. Like I said, uh, Dapple could become Colonial if we don't clamp down on Colonial now. Um, the environment is suffering. The EPA doesn't care. That's a story for a different day. But look, just because it's happening on the East Coast, just because it's happening in red states, it doesn't mean it doesn't matter, and it doesn't mean it shouldn't be a story. It should absolutely be a story. And I encourage anybody that does care about pipeline issues in this country, um, Colonial Pipeline is where you need to start, and that needs to be what you are bringing. If you bring any kind of pipeline or oil and gas issue to any of your favorite politicians or activist groups, you need to start with Colonial because they're the most imminent threat that we have as far as pipelines go. Other than that, you guys can catch me on Twitter and on Rockfin at Robleto Fire, Robleto Fire. And before I go, I just like to always encourage everybody's audience. If you guys later on tonight get bored, need something to do, and have about 5 or 10 minutes of free time, I encourage you to find some way, either on the internet, a book, something, to basically read up a little bit about autism and its effects
Mm-hmm.
on children specifically, so we can help build a more inclusive and educated society for our neurodiverse brothers and sisters out there. But other than that, guys, that's all I got time for. So I really appreciate you having me on, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on, Robbie. Some final shout outs. Adriana Sandoval, thank you very much for the Super Ray. And SnoreKY2K said, have Robbie get in touch with Redneconomics. Yeah, Redneconomics, shout out to you. She's in the chat right now. She has a great
Okay.
show. Yeah,
Sure.
I think you guys would have a great discussion together. But
Okay.
yeah, guys, thank you very much for watching. Robbie, thank you again, brother, for coming on and
Of
informing
course.
my audience. Well, the MCSC network audience also, but
Of
whoever
course.
finds us also, thanks again, man. And
No
to
problem.
everybody else, don't forget to stay informed. Take care, everybody.